Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Bree Kirsch, and I'll be the moderator for this session. And before we begin, I do have a few reminders. We do have a code of conduct that we are following and adhering to for the conference, and I'll post the link in chat shortly. If you do experience any issues related to conduct, please contact us via our email, which I will also put into the chat. Please be sure to have your microphone muted, and during the Q&A, please wait until you are invited to unmute before asking your question or making a comment. You may also use the chat for questions. And the session is being recorded. You can enable captions by clicking on the Show Captions button at the bottom of the screen. The presenters for these 3 lightning rounds include Kristen Howard from McGill University, Megan Marchese from Farmingdale State College, and J. Denise Lewis from Wake Forest University. Please join me in welcoming our presenters.
Okay, thank you so much, Bree. And in theory, I am sharing my screen. So since we are going at lightning speed, I'll go ahead and get started. So thank you everyone for joining us today. You might be seeing my puppy walk by in the background. We just moved this week, so he might be in and out as he figures things out. My presentation today is about incorporating AI literacy into primary source literacy in history classes. So just to give a little bit of a background on the course that I'm going to be talking about. It was a 400-level history course here at McGill University in Canada on British North America, focused on social history, cultural history, and political history of all of the British North American colonies, with a focus on Canada as well as the United States. This is what I would consider maybe a mixed methods class. The students met twice a week. One day they had lecture from the professor and one day they had discussion. And it was a small class of just 13 students this year. I had previously partnered with the professor on a one-shot focused entirely on ChatGPT, and she invited me to come to another class in this particular course to do a little bit more with ChatGPT, with AI, and talking with the students, but she wanted me to try something different, or at least she gave me the option to try something different. So my goals for this instruction were to create a unique one-shot for advanced history students that combined primary source literacy and AI literacy with the kind of idea to help students develop critical thinking skills. And I decided to focus on the ACRL frame, authority is constructed and contextual, because I thought that authority was a really good way to approach both primary source literacy as well as AI literacy. And for those of you who might not be familiar with primary source literacy or the guidelines for primary source literacy developed by ACRL, RBMS, and SAA, it's the knowledge, skills, and abilities required to effectively use primary sources, those sources that serve as original evidence for a particular historical time period. In most of the history classes that I go into, students are expected to identify their own primary sources for a large research paper, and that was the case for this class. So to go over kind of what I came up with for this activity. So after a brief overview of what constitutes primary and secondary sources, which is a pretty typical way for me to begin instruction sessions for history students, I then asked students if there were other types of sources. Students said things like, encyclopedias, they had a few other ideas, and I was kind of thinking, that they might say things that are counted as tertiary sources, like encyclopedias, but also I was kind of leaning here towards, what might generative AI do? What kind of sources are those? I then presented students with 3 source excerpts, one at a time. First, an 18th century letter on smallpox in Detroit. Then an early 19th century anti-Catholic polemic that was supposedly written by a former nun, but was in fact not. And then I showed them a letter dated 1724 that was supposedly written by a woman living on the Canadian frontier that was generated by ChatGPT. So for each of these sources, I presented students with an excerpt, and then I asked them, what is this? Is it real? What do you kind of think about it? And we discussed them. I went with that ChatGPT source last to kind of give students this kind of fun aha moment of, oh, this source wasn't real. What's the deal with this? What kind of instruction are we getting in this class? So then from there, we had an overview of ChatGPT and LLMs, how to differentiate between primary sources and other types of sources using that concept of authority from the frame. Now, you'll see here on this slide that I'm calling these sources true primary source, spurious story, and fake sources. So these are essentially categories that I invented for this instruction, but to give you an idea of what I mean by spurious stories. So I'm thinking of these as being historical myths of any kind that are in some way intended to fool the audience into believing they're real. And these can be good or bad, perhaps moralistic or nefarious, but they're likely based in some part on something real or truthful. And to give you an idea, some of the kind of tall tale types of spurious stories that we might know really readily are things like George Washington and the apple tree, the story of Johnny Appleseed, or the story of Paul Bunyan. These are typically based on real life characters, but something's kind of going on that makes us know that things might not be quite true, that there's something questionable about authority here. And I conceived of these kinds of sources that I'm labeling as real, spurious as fake, as being on kind of a spectrum of authority. So ranging from real sources, those from the documentary record, these kind of spurious stories in the middle, perhaps based on some kind of reality, but are perhaps myths or tall tales, unclear, or perhaps could be interpretations. And then on the far side, I have these fake sources. So in this class, we talked about things that were generated by ChatGPT, but some other kinds of fake sources could perhaps go into this category too, like perhaps conspiracy theories. So going back to the activity, now that I've kind of defined what those terms are that I used, I then gave students 4 more sources, so in a handout instead of on the slides this time, and I asked them to consider whether they were real, spurious, or fake. Keeping in mind what we had talked about the concept of authority, I told students that they were allowed to look things up, they were allowed to use encyclopedias, they were allowed to do whatever they wanted to do, and they worked in groups of between 2 and 4, the students who they typically worked with in that class, to decide what was the deal with these sources. Were any of these ones fake ones that I came up with as well? What I gave the students were in total of these 4 sources, 3 were true primary source excerpts, but they all had some kind of contested authority, either due to authorship or topic or timing. So for example, if we look at that second one on my list, the description of the burning of the Montreal Parliament building in 1849, this was a real newspaper account written by somebody who had been accused of being the person who had started the fire. And the newspaper account was written about 30 years later. So it was a real source taken from a newspaper by somebody involved in the incident, but it was written a great deal later, so there were perhaps some questions about authority there. So each of the different sources I gave had some kind of a question for students to be able to dig into about what's going on with this source, how do I treat it? And finally, the 4th source was my fake source, or the 4th source on the list. It wasn't the 4th in the document packet I gave the students, because that would be too easy. And this one, it was presented as a newspaper article about the kidnapping of an enslaved woman named Chloe Cooley in the late 18th century. So the students were given about 20 minutes to go over these sources and talk together before we discuss them all as a group to go over what's the deal with all of these sources. So since this is the generative AI conference, I wanted to show you kind of how I went about generating these sources. So I just used ChatGPT. So as we know, nice, simple, and easy. It was very easy to generate the first source that I showed students that was fake. I just asked ChatGPT to write a diary entry. It created one. And this was really interesting to talk about with students because there were a lot of both, let's say, red flags and also green flags. So to me, the red flags in this source were times where it talked about, where it used terminology that we simply wouldn't have used in the 18th century, really current terminology. For example, it talked about this woman's experience with Indigenous peoples in Canada. But of course, we wouldn't have been using the term Indigenous at this time period. What's perhaps more interesting is when I asked ChatGPT to generate the source about the kidnapping of Chloe Cooley. This was the first time that I encountered this thing with ChatGPT that I've heard had happened with other people before, which is that it won't generate content about certain things. And asking it to create a letter suggesting the kidnapping of a person was not something that ChatGPT was found to be acceptable. I thought this was really interesting because I asked this question following asking ChatGPT if it knew who Chloe Cooley was, to make sure that this was something that had kind of passed through the historical record and had made it into the training model for ChatGPT. So it wouldn't create a letter suggesting the kidnapping, but it would create a newspaper account describing the events. So that little small difference made a really big difference in getting this source. But of course, it happened quite quickly. So I have a couple of pieces of student feedback from this class. This was from a general forum that I created for general feedback at the end of the year. This was not from the class in particular. So I did not think ahead enough to create that kind of feedback mechanism at the class. But at the end of the year, so many months after this instruction, 2 students did mention the ChatGPT, the AI instruction. And we'll see that first long quote from one of the students. The student definitely found the instruction interesting and definitely learned some things. Although I will note that what the student is kind of saying here are things that they could have learned from other places as well, not just in the class. But clearly the instruction did make some kind of an impact on at least a couple of the students. And then for my kind of lessons learned, the activity was well received by both the professor and the students. Based on my previous instruction section with the professor, I decided not to combine my normal standard one-shot instruction like secondary source database searching because it was just too much to fit into one instruction session and also was a little overwhelming for the students. One thing that I would suggest if you wanted to create this kind of session is that to get all of those true primary sources and spurious sources, discussion with the professor of what to include is critical for non-subject experts because it's really easy to have ChatGPT generate things for us, but it's actually quite difficult to locate those true primary sources to find a useful excerpt to then transcribe it into your instructional materials. So you need to have that kind of partnership with a professor if you aren't an expert in that time period yourself. I also think that this activity could be replicated across time periods and subjects, so in any historical class. And I think that doing this again and again, if students had to do it in more than one class, they would learn more. I don't think this is the kind of instruction that would be too boring to be repeated for students. So in conclusion about this instruction session, I think that generating generative AI into my kind of more traditional information literacy instruction, talking about primary source literacy, talking about authority, allowed students to develop AI literacy as well as primary source literacy without requiring an entire session devoted entirely to new and emerging technologies, which would be a hard sell with the professors for me in the history department. And again, this format could be adapted not only to other time periods and themes, but also to perhaps academic or secondary sources or tertiary sources. So we could move beyond primary source literacy here if we were interested in it. And I will just flash you my references real quick before I stop sharing so that we can move on to our next lightning talk speaker. Thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. I am Megan Marchese from Farmingdale State College on Long Island. I'm going to be talking about a survey of students' experiences and their opinions about generative AI. I administered the survey this past spring semester. It was anonymous and there were 250 responses. To get participants, I emailed faculty asking if they would announce the survey in class or post it in their learning management system. I also emailed clubs, handed out paper surveys, and posted flyers. The survey asked questions about students' experiences using AI in general and for college assignments, how students use AI throughout different stages of the writing and working process, their opinions on ethical and responsible use of AI for college assignments, and how colleges should teach students how to use AI, if at all. The survey had responses from a range of students across different class standings and ages. There were also a wide variety of responses by major. When asked how often students use AI, 29% said that they rarely use it, closely followed by 28% saying that they use it sometimes. 26% said that they have never used it, which is a number that I was surprised by. 10% use it often, and 7% use it frequently. Freshmen and sophomores were more likely to have rarely or never used AI. Juniors were more likely to use AI rarely and sometimes. Most seniors responded that they use AI sometimes, and 20% of them said that they use it often. So it seems that juniors and seniors were more likely to have used AI compared to freshmen and sophomores. Looking at usage by age, those who said they use AI frequently or often were more likely to be older. And when asked which AI tools students are using to complete college assignments, most are using ChatGPT. Students were asked to select how they use AI for assignments. So from the highest to lowest responses, 49% said that they use it to identify a topic, 45% said to create an outline for a writing assignment, 40% said to create summaries of texts or to get summaries of texts, 34% said to proofread or edit assignments, 31% to select keywords, 30% to create study materials, 29% to get answers for an assignment, 22% to develop a thesis statement or research question, and 20% said that they have copy and pasted AI responses for an assignment. So those who responded that they have copied and pasted AI responses received these 3 questions about how much they've copied and pasted. So most of these students agree that they've copied and pasted AI responses for 25% or more of an assignment. So no one strongly disagreed with this amount. 47% said that they copied and pasted responses for 50% or more of an assignment, but 42% disagreed that they've copied this much. And then when asked if they've copied 75% or more, we see that 65% disagree that they've done this. However, 23% did say that they agree that they have copied this much. Looking at whether or not students check if AI responses are accurate, 72% said that they strongly and somewhat agree that they check for accuracy. When asked if they edit responses in their own words, 79% said that they agree that they've done this. When asked if they found AI to be useful for college assignments, 70% said that they strongly and somewhat agree that it is useful. And then they were asked to explain their answer as to whether or not they thought it was useful. A lot of students use AI to help them get started with assignments. They use it to get ideas, create outlines, and brainstorm topics. They use it to help them learn, including simplifying complex wording, getting background information about a research topic, and as a way to get explanations for concepts. A number of people said that they use AI to help them understand the assignment requirements, and some also said they use AI to make sure their work has met the requirements of an assignment. A lot of people also said that AI helped improve their writing, including giving new approaches to their writing and helping with grammar. There were a lot of comments about writing sophistication, basically saying that they ask AI to make their writing sound better and finding better ways to say something. Many people said they use AI for proofreading too. So the next area includes comments about how they use AI to help them expand upon their ideas. They use it to supplement their work. It gives them tips for how to complete their work, and it can assist with difficult questions. Another theme was how AI can help save time. Some comments said it was quick and that it helped with deadlines. And then there were some comments about how AI is not necessarily useful, that sometimes it gives incorrect information. Others said sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Most respondents, 80%, said that they strongly or somewhat agree that their use of AI is ethical. And here are some comments from those who said that they do use AI ethically. So the first theme is that they view AI as a source of information like any other academic source, similar to Google, textbooks, thesauri, websites. Some comments were, I'm not using it for something that Google couldn't help me with, and what's the difference between generative AI and Google? Students also talk about using AI as an assistant. They use it to help them brainstorm, for inspiration, to get ideas. There were a lot of responses that said that they use AI to improve their grammar and vocabulary. They use it for outlines, checking work, and study guides. Again, they talk about using AI to learn and understand assignments. They said AI can explain what is being asked, show how it got its solution, and then can keep asking questions to help them better understand. Students also felt that they were using AI ethically because they were paraphrasing the AI response in their own words, but most did not mention citing AI or when they paraphrase it. So 57% strongly and somewhat agree that using AI for assignments is plagiarism. 20% said neither agree nor disagree, 13% somewhat disagree, and 8% strongly disagree. So the students who agree that it's plagiarism said it depends on how it's used. They said it's okay to use it as a learning tool or a support tool, including using it to get ideas, to help with grammar, to create outlines, and to organize your work. It's okay to use it for definitions. They said it's okay to use it to reword your writing. They said it's not okay to submit exactly what AI gives you. They commented about the lack of citations that AI provides in its responses and that it doesn't give the source of its information. They talked about how AI takes information from the internet without citing or giving credit. And then there was also a theme about how AI output is not your own work. People said you're not learning when you use it, that it's cheating, lazy, not fair for students who don't use it. So looking at those who disagreed that using AI for assignments is plagiarism, there were several comments about how AI's response is unique for every person. So that's why they don't consider it plagiarism. So one said, it's technically your own words because it's unique. Another differentiated between copying from a regular website, which they did consider plagiarism, and using a ChatGPT response, which they questioned, why would it be plagiarism? Because it has never been worded in that way before. But students from this group also said that it depends how you use it. So again, they said it's okay to use AI as a tool to help them learn and plan their work. They said it's okay to use AI responses as long as you cite them. Some also said that it's okay, that it's not okay to copy and paste. They mentioned issues with accuracy of the responses, the fact that your own thoughts or skills are not coming across in the assignment. And some said it's definitely plagiarism if the whole assignment you're submitting is AI generated. So I wanted to see if students were learning how to use AI in their courses. So 30% strongly and somewhat agreed that they have learned AI in their courses, but most did not. And I wanted to see if they thought that they should be learning how to use AI in college. So 43% strongly or somewhat agreed, 33% said neither, and then 23% did not agree that they should be learning this in college. I asked them to provide some more details about how they would want to learn how to use AI. 44% said colleges should be teaching how to use AI through library instruction sessions. 44% said also said through workshops. 29% said in specific courses, and 24% said through asynchronous training. And the specific classes that people mentioned where they would want to learn AI include writing classes, architecture, coding, programming, computer science classes, engineering, first-year experience, visual communications, and art classes. One person said they would like it to be covered in our first-year experience class to explain what is and what is not okay to do with it, how to use it as a tool and not a crutch. There was also a comment about teaching AI safety and learning how to cite it. And then the last question was open-ended for students to share any additional thoughts that they had. So here are some themes that were mentioned. Students want to learn how to effectively use AI. AI is growing in popularity and is necessary for certain disciplines. And one person said it would just be wild and outrageous to completely reject it. Students also talked about their concerns of inaccuracy and not learning writing skills or not gaining knowledge. And then some people talked about how AI doesn't always give them the responses or the help that they need for assignments. So one said it takes the same amount of time perfecting it than it does writing it yourself. Another said having friends, tutors, professors, or the writing center look over your assignment is more reliable. They can better understand the nuances of the assignment and of language and can give better feedback than AI can. And lastly, here are some things to think about in terms of the library. Students need to learn more about what AI is, what are acceptable uses for it in college. They did express interest in learning how to use AI through information literacy classes, other types of college workshops, or in an asynchronous format. Some skills that they need include making sure they understand the basics of AI, including how responses are generated, potential problems with responses, including inaccuracy, bias, hallucinations. And there is a need to reinforce the importance of evaluating information and to explain that there are differences in quality between different types of sources. And with AI responses, the source of the information is usually not clear. So we know the information is coming from somewhere on the internet, but we don't necessarily know where. And that ties into the typical ways we teach students how to evaluate information, like who created it, for what purpose, and so on. Students need to know when it would be beneficial to use AI, such as in parts of the research process, and when it would be a problem in the context of college coursework. It would also be helpful for them to know how to cite AI and when citations are necessary. So many of the responses to this survey discussed getting information from ChatGPT, but they didn't really mention citing that information. And then based on some of the comments about plagiarism and AI's unique response, I think it's important to have a discussion about the definition of plagiarism in the context of AI. So for example, some plagiarism definitions have the phrasing that plagiarism means taking credit for someone else's work, words or ideas, or passing off the words or ideas of another as your own. And apparently some students don't consider ChatGPT to be someone else or another. So as we saw, some people think that because AI is not a person, using AI's response is not taking anyone's ideas. And then just one final point is just to discuss with faculty members about whether or not incorporating AI into information literacy classes is something that they would be interested in. So when I was contacting faculty to announce the survey, some were really enthusiastic, others were not, saying that they would not share the survey because students know they're not allowed to use ChatGPT. So I think it would just be good to make sure that it's an appropriate fit for the class. Okay, thank you.
Jay, Denise, just so you know, we can see the presenter version, so we can see, yeah. There you go, perfect, thank you. And you are muted currently.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'll be talking about techniques for prompting generative AI to build a search string. In the short time that I'll be talking, I'll just give a quick overview of who I am, and then discuss two different approaches with regards to prompting to create a search string, as well as show you how it worked, and then we can transition to Q&A. So in terms of who I am, beyond an avid bibliophile, NFL fan, and kitchen chemist, I'm a fourth career librarian, and that my initial 2 degrees were a bachelor's and master's in electrical engineering from Georgia Tech. And I figured out that I worked everywhere except for nonprofit. So worked in industry in terms of software testing and training and automation, as well as a chef, and now as a librarian at Wake Forest. So when we talk about different ways that we can use generative AI to create a search string, we can do slow prompting, literally just asking one question at a time. And in this particular example, I use Claude.ai. So you can ask the generative AI tool, for example, do you know about systematic reviews? If I gave you a research question, could you write a search string for a systematic review? But literally asking it, does it know about doing XYZ? And if you do, can you do it in this particular manner? Or you can use the kitchen sink method. In this case, I use ChatGPT 4.0, the letter, not the number. And you can ask everything at once. So in this example, I just said I'm researching transaortic transcatheter aortic valve implantation using Edwards Sapien. Can you write a search string for me that I can use in Web of Science, Google Scholar, Embase, and Scopus academic databases? And got a search string back from ChatGPT. So let's demo. So I started playing around with using generative AI to write search strings earlier this spring semester. So since at our library, we're trying to figure out what systematic review services we're offering by actually going through and conducting a systematic review. We had already done this search before I started playing around with writing a search string. So in Claude, I just asked, do you know about systematic reviews? And it actually came back with an explanation, yeah, I'm familiar. Hit on the key characteristics of a systematic review, and then discuss, what systematic reviews are intended to do. So I asked the question, if I gave you a research question, could you write a search string for a systematic review? Seeming that generative AI has been used to write code as well as make code more efficient. There's even an app out now that if you gave it a scenario would actually be able to create the code, test the code, and then give it to you to run. So it came back and said, yep, I can write a search string for you. But then it basically said, provide me with your research question and other details. So I gave it our research question, gave it our key concepts, and it came back with a very extensive search string. And it said that, explained how it created the search string. I asked it, are you familiar with Library of Congress subject headings? It replied, yes, explain Library of Congress subject headings. So I asked to rewrite the search string and include Library of Congress subject headings where appropriate. And then it rewrote the search string and added /DE, tested that, asked it to remove it, and it did for an additional search string. But just to show you those results, so I went ahead and used that search string and searched on Web of Science. It actually returned 142 results. And remember, for this particular search string, we're looking to see what have other academic libraries done with regards to research data services. So there's maturing research data services, transformation of academic libraries, research data services, and Spanish academic libraries, leveraging undergraduate federal work study students' skill sets to support an art university library research data services. So you can see that the results returned are extremely relevant to what we're looking at and doing. And I actually ran the search string also on Google Scholar, got 1,450 results. And yet again, those references actually returned are on point with what we're looking at to research. And going back and asking ChatGPT that I'm researching transaortic, transcatheter, aortic value implantation using Edward Sapien to write our search string. ChatGPT wrote the search string, didn't provide the additional details in terms of the full description of how it was written, but I copied it and I ran it. So I ran the search string in Embase. Yep, that's how long it is. So there were 5,110 results. Now, the results are sort of kind of on point. So in some of them, it was very general in terms of just discovering transaortic valve replacement, but not that specific technique or actual valve. But then again, I didn't go in and read the abstract or the paper to say, yes, that's indeed true. But just from reading some of the titles, it may or may not be relevant. And doing the same search on Scopus, that same meta-analysis appeared in Scopus. There were 1,353 documents found. And then there were, again, identifying some references that may be relevant. I found it mucho better on Google Scholar in terms of running the same search string. Those search results were more on point in terms of developing a transcatheter aortic valve implantation, directly in the title, more relevant. Then I also ran that same search string in Web of Science. And you can see from Web of Science, more relevant results, global research, etc. Now, the only thing I haven't done is to see how it compares from using multiple generative AI tools. So like using Gemini, using Grok, using LayChat, Mistral, Perplexity.ai, and so forth. But we are at that point where you can generate a search string using generative AI, similar to coding. So there's my contact details, and we'll turn it over to Q&A.
Well, thank you, presenters. Those were some excellent brief lightning presentations. I appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us. I did see one question come through in the chat about asking if it would be possible to share your slides. And if any of you are willing to respond to that, you can. And I do see that one question was asked in the Q&A and already responded to. So if there are any other questions, feel free to type those into the chat or the Q&A so our presenters can respond to those. Okay, one came through for Megan. What has the university done to address generative AI?
Well, I think that's still in process for us. I know that, so we're part of the SUNY system, the State University of New York, and there were some guidelines put out through SUNY. I believe at this point, it's at the professor's discretion about whether they would like to have students not use it or to incorporate it into their class. So one interesting thing that happened was when I handed out some paper surveys was one student attached their nursing assignment, which was incorporating ChatGPT. They like stapled it to the survey. So like that was really interesting to see what some students are doing in class.
Yeah, at Wake Forest University, from the university perspective, the only rule per se is for every professor to have a statement in their syllabus for how they like AI used in their classroom, whether they don't allow it with citation or use it as much as possible with citation or not. At our university, our Center for the Advancement for Teaching director, Betsy Baer, has been extremely interested in generative AI, especially ChatGPT, as well as in AI in general. So we've had different workshops as well as seminars or mini conferences with regards to utilizing generative AI and AI.
And Jay, Denise, we actually had two questions come in for you. For the prompting search strings topic, did you feel that slow prompting or kitchen sink prompting worked better in most cases?
I think slow prompting worked best because it was almost as if it was preparing the tool for what you wanted to ask for the complexity. And then in terms, yeah, but the only thing I haven't done is really to test that on a variety of different generative AI tools. That'll be my next step.
Great, thank you. And the next question for you, I find the idea of using AI to assist with search syntax very interesting. I was coming to grips with the idea that Boolean would be replaced with well-engineered prompting, but this flips that on its head. Thoughts?
Yeah. Right now, in terms of interfaces, most databases still are utilizing Boolean logic. Some databases are moving to, and of course, since it's the afternoon, my brain is like, but basically being able to type in what you want and for the database to search without prompting. I forget technical terminology for it, for that particular type of taxonomy. But at any rate, but yeah, if you think about where we're at right now with the fact that there are over 8,000 databases, you can still use generative AI for it to ask it to generate a search string. You know, if you think about the different models that academic libraries are moving to, some still have a liaison model, some are moving more to a functional model. But if you're interacting with a variety of databases, especially a database that you're not familiar with, it'll be a quick way for you to get started. If you're, you know, basically limited in time for coming up to speed on the database itself. Thank you, natural language prompts.
Very good, thank you. And are there any other questions at this point from anybody? We have a couple minutes left. We had another question come in the chat. Did you share out the results of your survey?
Not yet. That is coming. We're going through, still like analyzing the data right now, going through it all, and hopefully by the end of the summer, we'll have something.
And I'll do a follow-up. Are you planning on trying to publish an article about it or a presentation at a conference or just sharing it at your university?
I would like to publish an article, and we do have each year a faculty symposium about their current research. So I would also be interested in sharing it with the institution that way.
Great. And they followed up. She meant your campus faculty. So I think you just answered that too. We have another question. It seemed some of the search syntax was wrong. Maybe it's my poor vision and terrible memory. So I guess that's not really a question. Any other questions that anyone has for any of our presenters? We have a comment from one of our attendees about Kathy Davies did a survey of health professional students using AI and they used fairly frequently. All right, well, I'm not seeing any additional questions at this point. Oh, one just came in. For Megan, which results surprised you?
I was surprised by the theme about how students were talking about a unique response, that they actually said that they felt like it was their own words because of the prompt that they put in, and that they just did not consider it plagiarism at all. So that surprised me. Also, the higher number of students that were not using it yet also surprised me.
Okay, well, I'm not seeing any more questions at this point. If you do have any other, oh, there's one more coming in, or maybe it's a comment. Oh, for Kathy, it looks like that's for somebody in the chat. Does that mean that faculty allowed it for assignments or that health professional students were using it regardless of assignment parameters? And then she answered in the chat, mainly to summarize, find diagnosis, and sometimes find literature. Thanks. Oh, we did have one more question come in the Q&A for Kristen. Did you ever generate responses that were hard to determine as fake?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I never found them hard to distinguish, but my students did sometimes find them hard to distinguish, as well as some of my librarian colleagues who work more in the social sciences or sciences as opposed to in the humanities. So I think that based on our experience, sometimes it is a little bit harder to tell or to think about, like I pointed out in the presentation. For me, using the word indigenous in something that's dated 18th century, that's clearly not the word that would be used then, was a big red flag to me, but not necessarily to my colleague who mostly works with kinesiology students, for example. So that was something when I kind of pointed that out to her, she went, oh, of course, but she just wasn't kind of steeped in that as some of my advanced history students might be, for example. So I think it depends on your experience within a particular historical field, perhaps. I'm sure that if there were things that were generated that were fake in the science literature, I'd be like, yeah, that seems great to me. So I think it's just based on that kind of experience.
Great. And a question for Megan. They're curious what you think about freshmen not using AI nearly as much as upper class. What might that indicate for future classes?
This is just speculation that maybe older students, more experienced students kind of know which class, like, are more comfortable with doing college coursework. Some comments had said that they used ChatGPT for classes that they didn't really care about, just to save them time. So that might have something to do with it. Some of our students are older students, like adult learners. So maybe they just need to just get their work done. They don't care how they do it, maybe just to save time. So that's just like one thought behind that.
We had another question come in. Do you think some of the students might not have been completely honest with their survey responses? Even anonymously, they could see some students not wanting to acknowledge that they copied and pasted directly from AI.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's one of the limitations of the study. I did note in the informed consent that it was completely anonymous, that we even the online form was through Qualtrics, and we disabled the collection of IP addresses. So I tried to make it known that their faculty will not have access to the survey, but you know, that is a possibility.
Great. Well, we have one final minute if there's one final question. Otherwise, thank you so much to our presenters for their informative presentations and sharing their knowledge with us. We just had one more come in for Denise. Do you think that the generated search strings were superior to strings you could have written? Did you see any problems with them?
Yes and no. Yes, from the standpoint of being able to brainstorm more additional keywords and possibility. No, from the standpoint that the databases that I'm more familiar with, I've learned in terms of different strategies for searching, and the search strings don't necessarily need to be as long to be as efficient.
Okay, great. Well, we are out of time now, so thank you all of you for your presentations, and the recording should be available shortly on the Zoom event page, and we will be posting those eventually to our conference website as well as our YouTube channel. So thanks for attending the session, and we'll see you in other sessions in the future, hopefully. Bye, everybody.
Bye.